Hello again. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on moral reasoning. In this video, I want to talk about the idea and the ideal of justification. So, when we want to persuade other people that one course of action is better than another, we offer them a justification. A justification is a set of moral reasons designed to convince an audience. However, there can be moral reasons in favor and against a particular action. Let me give you an example. The natural affection between parents and their children is a good moral reason to let parents raise their offspring rather than have someone else do it, like the government. But that reason can be outweighed by other moral reasons. If the parents are abusive or neglectful or just completely insane, we might have better reasons to let someone else raise the children. Maybe relatives, maybe the government. So, the idea that parental affection is a reason to let them raise their children is sometimes called a prima facie reason, or a pro tanto reason. These are fancy ways of saying that these are the reasons that apply unless other reasons come and supersede them. Right? So the prima facie reason is the reason that's going to be decisive unless other moral reasons come into play, in this case, neglect or abuse. But the question becomes, why do these reasons, neglect and abuse, get to supersede the prima facie reason? Why don't we just leave children in the care of abusive or neglectful parents? What yardstick could possibly tell us which course of action is the right one for us to take? Remember, this is practical. We're thinking about which action we want to take. So there's a couple of different ways we could go here, and that's going to be the topic for our third lecture in this series. But to give you a little bit of a preview, we could use the yardstick of the welfare of the children, for example. We could say that children are usually better off with their parents unless some other unusual circumstance arises. We could also appeal to the overall welfare of society. So children might be better off if they are free of neglect and abuse, but parents might be worse off, right? Parents might be making themselves better off by abusing and neglecting their children. And so we might have to come to some balance of considerations, right? How much abuse or how much harm do the children have to suffer before they can be taken away? Because after all, the welfare of the parents counts too. So whichever way other people would say, the welfare of the parents that's achieved through neglect and abuse just shouldn't count, right? It just doesn't count. Only the welfare of the children count. Wherever you side on that debate, the point is this: you're trying to look at which consequences end up producing the most beneficial outcomes, right? You're looking at outcomes. But looking at outcomes is not the only way you could go. You could also ask, well, which set of rules about who should raise children best respects the dignity of all parties involved, particularly the dignity of the children? And since abuse and neglect fails to treat children with any kind of respect, any set of rules that permits abuse and neglect should really be reconsidered. So you've got a couple different yardsticks, right? Respect, or respect for persons on the one hand, or a kind of appeal to the maximum best consequences for all relevant parties. So when we're offering justifications, like I said earlier, we want to persuade other people that one course of action is better than another. And justifications don't just rely on facts. Justifications have to, at some point in the argument, rely on assertions about value. Moral assertions, in other words. There's no way around it. Even if your moral assertion is simply that it's going to be in somebody's best interests, right? That's still an assertion of value. Not all interests matter. Like I said earlier, the parents' interest in neglecting the children may not actually even count. The parents' interest in abusing the children just perhaps shouldn't even count. It's not just outweighed by the misery of the children. It's not even doesn't even come into the equation. But political theory, therefore, isn't just describing ideologies. It isn't going out there and doing kind of ethnological or sociological study of what communists believe and how their different beliefs interact, or what liberals or conservatives or libertarians believe. But it also tries to critically assess these beliefs. It tries to figure out whether these beliefs are internally consistent, whether they are coherent with our best knowledge of the world and our knowledge of knowledge of how the world works. And so we're trying constantly to do better. We're trying to critically assess rather than just describe. And that's so because we're assuming, at least, that people have a little bit of a choice about what their outlook on the world is. That is to say, we've all at some point in time in our lives changed our mind about something. We've all realized that we were wrong, right? Which lets us know that we have a choice about how to react to the world, how to look at it, how to evaluate it. And we need to have a set of principles, a set of values by which we evaluate the world. And when we engage in political theorizing, we are constantly asking ourselves which reasons should carry the day, which reasons should ultimately motivate our actions. Now, because we want to know what people should do, right? Because this is practical, we say that political theory, like all moral reasoning, is normative and prescriptive, usually. Political theory deals with questions of value. And when we talk about questions of value, we're talking about normative questions. But justifications are more than just describing a set of moral reasons. It's also prescriptive. Justifications are prescriptive. Justifications tells you not just that something counts as a moral reason, but it also tells you what you should do about it, which way you should act. Because, if you think about it, at the end of the day, we try to justify policies and institutions and laws and executive orders and all of that because without a justification, it's not clear that we have any good reason to do it. Okay. So, given that it's appropriate to give some sort of justification, why do we call it moral reasoning rather than, say, moral emoting? Why do we give people reasons rather than tell them how we feel? First, I want to say, sometimes sharing your feelings is in fact the appropriate thing to do. But before you share your feelings, you need to have some idea about whether it's appropriate to share your feelings at this time and place. In other words, you need some reasons to share your feelings. You can't just go ahead and emote without some kind of reasoning process behind it. Let me give you an example. If I ask you, why did you do that? And you answer, well, because I felt like it. Because I felt like it is only going to be a satisfactory answer if it's a situation where your feelings are a decisive moral reasoning. So if the decision was vanilla or chocolate ice cream, because I felt like it is actually a pretty good reason. This is a situation where it sounds like your feelings about it are pretty decisive. But if push comes to shove, you have to be able to give reasons why it's okay to go with your feelings. In this case, in matters of ice cream selection. You could say, my ice cream selection doesn't hurt anyone. It contributes to my happiness. Interferences, on the other hand, would make me unhappy, and they would be costly for whoever's enforcing those interferences, and it's not clear what benefit it would produce to anyone else, and so on and so forth. Now you can contrast this situation with a situation where you hit somebody over the head with a hammer. In that case, because I felt like it, is not going to be a satisfactory answer. Why? Because your feelings about whether you should hit people over the head with hammers aren't decisive, aren't going to be the ones that matter most. Hitting people with hammers is incredibly harmful. It might contribute to your happiness, but it certainly contributes to other people's unhappiness to a great degree. And therefore, interferences, though they might make you unhappy and be costly, might nonetheless be justified. Let me say a couple more words on justifications and on the process of giving reasons. Now, in the sciences, this process of giving reasons, of putting all one's cards on the table, as it were, is part of the scientific method. If you engage in scientific reasoning, typically the best explanation is the one that's going to be left standing after being pitted against all rival theories. And political theory, I think, works a lot in the same way. The best justification, the best account about what to do, is the one that's left standing after all have challenged it. Most political theorists, I think, hope that some progress in understanding questions of value can be achieved through a process of critical reasoning and open contestation by all. But progress in moral reasoning is slow. in part because the moral principles that serve as benchmarks for building political theories are frequently contested, and that's the topic of our third lecture. We have disagreements about what yardstick to use, and therefore we have a lot of disagreements when it comes to what ultimately the state should do. Typically, if you want to offer a political justification, you need to appeal to shared moral convictions rather than moral convictions that, say, only you and your friends share. If you appeal to fundamentally disputed principles, your offer of reasons is going to appear a little bit self-serving and insincere, rather than as a genuine attempt to persuade you. Right? So imagine invading a country and the people of that country ask, "Why did you invade?" And you said, "Our God told me so," and they don't share your religion. Well, it seems like your appeal to religion or your appeal to religious truth here is a little bit self-serving. After all, you're using reasons that they can't possibly access, that they have absolutely no purchase to. Now, is it conceivable that God really did tell you to go and invade that country? I suppose it is, and so I suppose it might be wrong to oppose that invasion. But at the same time, you can see how the offer of reasons isn't going to be politically very astute, because it's relying on reasons that, in this case, the conquered people can't really access. And the same is going to be true in science, right? In science, you're only going to be right in some sense if your explanations can be understood and examined by other people, if your experiments can be replicated and confirmed. Truth, it's true, is not relative to opinion, but to be a kind of truth, or at least an accepted truth, a theory has to be vetted by the right sort of process. And now in sciences we call it the scientific method. In political theory, if there are any truths to be found, I think they probably do have to be submitted to the same process of critical examination, which, at the end of the day, requires you to produce reasons that other people in the conversation can accept. The point isn't really to get other people to agree. After all, scientists disagree all the time too. But the point is more to prove one's bona fides, to prove one's credibility by submitting theories that are plausible and attractive, given the moral commitments the participants in the conversation share. In this way, the hope is that we can make progress. We might not be right, but by eliminating inconsistencies and errors, we can try to move forward. At the end of the day, consistent, clear, plausible, well-articulated theories have to be better than their opposite. Alright, so given that hopefully you're persuaded that you do owe justifications to people, the question becomes, who do you owe a justification? In fact, you might even ask yourself, why do you owe a justification at all? I think, for one, if you're trying to coerce other people, you probably owe a justification. And if you are, even if you're affecting other people in a serious way, you probably owe them a justification. And this gives us roughly the bounds of moral philosophy and political philosophy. Moral philosophy is when we're trying to figure out, we're trying to justify affecting other people, and political philosophy is when we're trying to figure out what the state should do, or in some cases, when it's permissible for individuals to coerce others. Let me give you an example. You probably do owe a justification to your boyfriend or girlfriend when you finally decide to break up with them. Surely your withdrawal from the relationship affects them in some way. But the standard of justification, the bar set for you that you have to meet, isn't particularly high. After all, you're not coercing them. You're affecting them. They might be very devastated, but you're not coercing them. You're not proposing to force them to do anything. In the case of leaving your boyfriend, I don't like you or I'm unhappy is probably a pretty good reason. But if you wanted to put your boyfriend to death, that I don't like you is not going to be as compelling. You need a better reason. So political justification, that is to say justifying coercion, is usually thought to require much stronger reasons than the reasons that might work for just you and your friends. To threaten other people, you need to have very good reasons. If you think about it, to fail to give a justification for coercion is to show a really marked disrespect to somebody else who presumptively is an equal citizen to you. It suggests that you consider yourself superior to others without even the need to prove it. Those who fail to give justifications when they're coercing you are usually termed unreasonable. Now, unreasonable in modern philosophy has a bit of a technical meaning. It means a refusal to offer terms of cooperation that others could rationally accept, given that they're self-interested individuals with their own plans of life. Now, I realize it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's one way to define unreasonable, to show that there are people who are engaged in the process of trying to have a conversation where they're giving reasons that others could potentially accept, and that's the difference between having a conversation and speechifying, where you're just throwing a speech at someone, but they couldn't possibly accept any of your reasons because your reasons are inaccessible to them. Now, I don't want to go so far as to say it's not the case that there are things you shouldn't have to justify. It's not unreasonable to try and justify why you shouldn't have to justify some things. But it is unreasonable to say that you owe no justification to anyone for anything that you do. Now, that's all I have. So that was a bit long, 16 minutes. If you have any questions, please let me know. And otherwise, move on to our third installment in this series of 3 on consequentialist and deontological thinking.